Welcome, everybody. We're live with absolutely special guest Peter Jackson Lee, author of the new book, San Carlos to Stanley, 40 Commando in the Falklands War. I thought we'd just start off with a little bit of an introduction. Maybe tell us how you became a member of 40 Commando, and just kind of how you whether you stumbled upon that over a longer path or a journey. I know the book doesn't necessarily get too deep into this, so I thought I might ask a few questions about kind of like how you got to where you got to. So I don't know if you want to start with that, Peter.
Yeah, basically, as everyone does, I joined the Royal Marines in February 1980. So you go through what they call a Commando training centre near Exeter. That's for a minimum of 6 months. So you start, all your basic training goes through there. You do all your Commando tests and everything else. Inevitably, everyone who joins with you will not leave with you because there'll be lots of injuries through the road. So they'll get back through, then they'll catch you up later. Once you've actually finished training and you're passed out, you're then officially called a Royal Marine. And then you get posted to different units. At that time, it was 40, 42, 45 Commando logs, and one or two other little splinter groups. So I was posted to 40. And at the time, just for the Falklands, we were up in Liverpool, which is my native part of the UK, on what we call PWT, so personal weapon tests. You have to do it every year. We pass all your tests, your running test, your physical test, your weapons test. And during our time up on the range, rumours started to circulate that the Falklands had been or were about to be invaded. So we sort of finished up there. We shot back to Plymouth. And I was with A Company at the time. And then we got an order to move before the rest of the unit. We jumped on the coaches, went down to Portsmouth, met with the Hermes, told her she was going to sail on the first tide. And then we had 26 wagons full of ammunition from the war stores come on board. And then we sailed. So the initial thought for us, for 40, was that we were either going to fly from RAF St. Morgan, I think it was, to Ascension and somehow get to the Falklands, or because there was no actual physical way to get there, because they thought, we'll send 120 Royal Marines down. Then we can sort of get the islands back, no big problem. But as we're sailing on the Hermes, I think we're going through the Bay of Biscay, this few hundred Argentines become 10,000 Argentines, which was a little bit skewed on the 3-to-1 ratio.
Uh-huh.
So they decided to throw us off at Ascension, threw us off onto the Tristram. We were joined by X-Ray Company 4-5 Commando. And then we just sat around, waited for the rest of the task force while the Hermes shot down to do whatever business you needed to do there.
Uh-huh.
And then obviously the rest of the task force came up. Lots of training, lots of zeroing weapons, live firing weapons. You wouldn't really normally get the chance to fire all that. And then while he sorted out all the stores, because the stores were loaded fairly hastily, and they were literally all over the place. So all that had to be sorted out. And then once the Sheffield got hit, then we all pretty much knew this was not going to be a political solution to this.
So I had one question. I think you mentioned this in the book as well. Was there not? Yeah, you kind of hinted at it there as well. There was a plan for A Company potentially to be what, C-130 or equivalent?
Yeah, probably a C-130 from RAF St. Morgan.
Right.
Fly us down to Ascension, and then I think it was an RFA that would catch us up there, and we'd have to go down on that and somehow figure out how we were going to land on that or from that. And then theoretically, I suppose, I've never even got to the bottom of it, but theoretically we were supposed to sort of take the islands back.
Right, or at least get a foothold quickly.
Yeah,
or try to, right?
Because the main point was the airfield at Stanley. It was a one-way trip for a C-130. There was no refueling coming back, and the airfield wasn't really built to be taking C-130s. So they could sit there on the tarmac and they'd actually sink, I suppose you could say it, in the tarmac, because it's just too heavy on the apron. So all that had to be trying to sort that out. So it was probably just C-130 all the way down. But again, you've got the refueling, which didn't in-flight refueling, which didn't really exist at the time, to enable it to actually get down there. So there was a lot of things that had to be calculated very quickly that people had never thought of before. So it was literally changing hour by hour.
So had there been any plans to even do anything prior to that? Like, so of course there was the evacuation of East Falklands. There was Royal Marines at that point as well, too, right? There was a garrison there as well.
You have Naval Party 8901, which had been down there since the 60s, I think.
And did they go all the way back to England, or did they stop in Ascension and wait? Do you remember?
Yeah, a couple of lads who actually came back down with us. That they met everyone at Ascension.
Okay.
Sorry, they flew back down to the UK, and then they were given a number to phone if they were getting harassed by journalists and things.
Okay.
Sorry, Peter.
Okay. That's okay.
So a lot of them did, and they phoned up and said, "Look, I'm not sitting here. I want to go back." So they caught up with everyone at Ascension, and then a lot of them got absorbed into 40 Commando. A lot of them become Juliet Company, 42 Commando, and then they just got taken part in then and just absorbed in.
Interesting. Okay. So first things first, let's kind of paint a picture of how the book kind of goes over in its sections. So you obviously do a pre-deployment. You also you sectionalize it from to Hermes to the landings, and then landings to the initial days. Can you describe a little bit more some of your experience on Hermes as far as your interaction with the crew and the fellow,
Normally, because we had not, again, just end of 1981, we'd done the pre-Commando trials on Hermes and Invincible, which means the whole unit lands on Hermes to do a full Commando assault off the Hermes or the Invincible, so they can see where the problems lie or if they've got any issues. So that was a stroke of luck. But normally when embarked forces go on, they have their own area or their own mess to concentrate in. But because we weren't expected and they weren't ready, they weren't going to sail, we were split up, literally bomb burst or scattered all over the Hermes, which the boss was not too happy with. And then we'd normally get a lot of time on the flight deck for training and military issues. And we basically had an hour a day where we had to use the flight deck with everyone else, along with the aircraft taking off and landing as well. So it was pretty.
The deck was extremely crowded too at that point in particular, right?
It was fairly crowded, and then once we'd sort of got across the equator, then it got even more crowded because then the aircraft, we had the roundels were being painted out and the aircraft were being repainted and things, because they pretty much knew it was a 60-40 sort of, they were going to actually go into a war situation, so they had a lot of prep work to do.
So you were actually on the carrier when it was harassed, if you will, by 707 reconnaissance. Do you recall that at all? Did you recall actually being aware of that and being a little, I don't know, whatever? Just tell me your feelings.
Yeah, we got rumors while we were sat at Ascension. We'd got rumors of various Russian interests,
okay,
and Argentine interests, but everyone was made aware of it, but nothing really came of it because there was, dare I say, more important things to do.
Okay.
Instead of just concentrating on looking at the air, we had the radar lads just looking at that, watching that. And I would think there's probably other ways, other people looking at it that
Right.
were going to take an interest if we got too close.
Right. Right. So when did you just correct me, but when did you cross deck, and which ship did you cross deck to, if you can remind me?
Cross deck not long after we got to Ascension.
Right.
We were basically kicked off. So, and the boss sort of said, "Well, I'm going. I'm taking my 400 tons of ammunition with me." And we cross decked onto the Tristram, which are very nice. The semi-flat bottom, so the slightest hint of a wave, and you're bouncing around everywhere. From that, we then went on to we cross decked onto the camera when she finally arrived. Then we joined the rest of the unit from there.
So when you get up to May 21st, you're disembarking from Canberra. Is that correct?
No, we'd done that on the 19th.
Okay.
They suddenly realised they've got too many eggs in one basket.
Right. Right.
And
right.
they've got the Paras and ourselves in Canberra, and we can't land from Canberra.
Right.
So I think, okay. So they were discussing what way to do it properly. Now, the obvious way was an airlift straight across. But that's a serious amount of hours on the airframe and the engine, and we don't know how long we're going to be down there, and we can't exactly just pop it into the airport to be fixed. So that was a serious consideration. The other one was the boatswain's chair. That was just never going to happen. So the final option was the landing craft. Now, bearing in mind it's the South Atlantic, 20, 30-foot seas are the norm. And you're thinking, well, how are we going to do this? So luckily the following day that the seas were quite calm, as calm as they can be down there. So we managed to transfer from the side cargo door on the camera into the landing craft. So if you can imagine a landing craft doing this upside of Canberra, you've got to judge it correctly to jump and land in a landing craft without trying to break your legs, like a telescopic fracture from a parachute jump.
Right, just the pressure alone can do that, right? Yeah.
So that was done successfully. We had one guy who I know quite well, Dave Sturge. He caught the tip of his boot on the door, and he fell between the Canberra and the landing craft. He managed to sort of pop up, and the landing craft lad got him, dragged him back into the landing craft.
How much kit was he carrying at that point?
He was the number 2 on GPMG, so he had something like 1,000 rounds, plus all his weapon, his webbing and stuff. So it's probably around £30 for your sort of webbing, then obviously your boots and everything else, plus the 1,000 rounds of GPMG. So he was quite heavy, and luckily Dave's a fairly big lad anyway.
Right.
But
and I think you mentioned a certain kind of like survival method that he used. I can't remember. Hopefully I got that right. But isn't there like a swimming method, or there is training about this? Right?
Oh yeah. Because of what happened basically on D-Day,
right.
A lot of lads jumped over the side of the landing craft and he couldn't swim, and he basically drowned. So one of the many tests we have every year was a battle swimming test. So you put on just a shirt, trousers, webbing, and put rocks in it to simulate all your ammunition, and you have an old 303. So you hold the end of the barrel of the 303, otherwise it's going to smack you in the back of the head, and you jump off the high diving board into the pool.
Okay.
And believe me, it hurts when it hits your head.
No matter what.
Then you had to swim breaststroke 2 lengths without touching the sides or the bottom. You then get back to the deep end, not dunk under the water, take your weapon off, hand it to someone on the side without touching sides. Same with your webbing, take it off, hand it to someone on the side, and then float for 5 minutes. That's
I think you're mentioning that also other Marines had like placed the butts of their rifles against as well.
Yeah. I mean, what I saw when they saw him go in and heard him go in, they were sort of putting the butt of the rifle against camera because Dave's head was going to become a fender and not a very good one. So they were trying to sort of keep the two craft apart while he was underwater before he popped back up. And the landing craft lads got him with the boat hook and dragged him back in. And then dragged him back to the landing craft with the steps and just threw him in the engine room because they just literally cannot stop loading landing craft. So he was just thrown in the engine room, which is obviously the warmest place. And then once he got on Fearless with us, he was then given a shower, hot shower, spare dry clothing, because all his kit was wet. And then we had forced rest the next day, so we gave him a chance to sort his kit out and then dry all the rounds, put all the link back together again, ready for the following day.
Do you remember what your leaders were telling you ahead of the landing? Just what to expect? What were the expectations that were relayed to you from a beachhead perspective? As far as
we don't know whether it's opposed or unopposed. It was like,
right,
okay,
great.
I think the paras were told theirs would be fairly unopposed, but we were told it's unknown whether it's opposed or unopposed. So we just have to wait and see.
And there had been SPS and SAS insertions ahead of that. How much intel day of or night of, very late night of, or even the day before? I mean, how much intel did you even have, and was that even relayed to you, honestly?
No, that wasn't relayed to us.
Right,
I mean,
right.
SF ops, you never get to hear about those ever. And we knew they were there. We knew they were going to flash alpha to us on a green light, and that was it. But you never get to know where, when, why SF ops are happening.
And there was diversionary NGS as well, correct?
Yeah.
And that they were trying to kind of pull that attention down more towards Goose Green, correct?
Yeah, that was on Fanning Head.
Okay.
And you had that was the SBS on Fanning Head and the SAS down towards Darwin, Goose Green area.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we not. Excuse me, know that.
Do you remember at all the first enemy aircraft you saw?
Quite literally, that. Because we're on the very mountains above San Carlos, so we're looking down on the whole thing, and you'd hear this thing coming in, and it'd just be gone, and then you'd see the splash in the water where the bombs had been released and hit the water. You wouldn't really see them that much. You'd see them for a second. Even on the 27th, when they started to bomb the actual San Carlos settlement itself, you just heard it flash, and then you saw the brown dirt go up. It was so quick.
Did you have, I mean, other than light arms, did you have, I remember in our previous talk, you had mentioned Rapier missiles, but those were not set up yet for the initial. It took a while, right? It took a little bit for that to get set up. And
to be honest, they were worse than useless.
Okay.
I know at one point the actual signal was sent back to London. I said, look, we need everything you've got. I don't care how strategic they are. We need it down here. They were worse than useless. Because Rapiers are set up for an airfield scenario, lovely, flat, concrete surfaces and big open spaces, they were putting these things on the side of mountains. And they're just not built for that. It's the same as the frigates and stuff. You Seawolf and all the rest of it.
What was its targeting system? Was it its own small radar?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So
so it was totally self-contained.
Right.
And they weren't built for that terrain. They weren't built for that system.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Same with Sea Wolf and Sea Darts and stuff.
Right.
Bring bit of kit when the ship's out at sea, and you've got a big, massive open expanse. But all it's got now is, if you can imagine, in the middle of a valley, and the aircraft's coming at you from one direction, that this big circular diameter targeted area is just gone to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think they did get a few hits, but they were very, very limited. And on the hill, we found that they weren't watching the faller shot. So a couple of times we'd have rapiers and things land on the hill. Like there's one next to B Company, I think. And you think, well, that's one of ours. You know, and the GPMGs were coming up from the ships, from the Matlows, but the rounds are actually falling on the hills.
How did you protect yourselves? How did you just do some good old-fashioned trenching and then use the peat? Did you get peat cubes or anything like that from the terrain or anything like that?
Well, the original idea was to build trenches, which is great. You're thinking, I'm at the top of a mountain, I'm not going to have a big problem. But as soon as you dug down, it filled full of water. You go, well, I'm at the top of a mountain. Why is this happening? So what we had to do was, as you say, you do the old chunks of peat. So you had to scatter them around. And obviously that then gives the pilot a mark of where those big brown patches are, then where you're going to be.
Right.
Big scars on the side.
Yeah, exactly. Anything that doesn't look natural is somebody.
So
along the lines of blue on blue, I apologize for interrupting. Were you told the parameters of like the blue on blue thresholds at all? I mean, were you relayed at all that, you know, any aircraft was to be considered an enemy or anything to that degree? Especially helicopters. I think at one point, you mentioned that at one point or another you were advised, given advisory not to fire on helos unless they were fully identified. Is that correct?
Oh no, it was the aircraft, because we knew that our aircraft would not come in to the San Carlos area.
Right.
So any aircraft that came in were Argentine.
Okay. All right.
But they did have a couple of helicopters very similar to ours, so
Right.
I think you had to be careful. But in the aircraft situation, because of the fall of shot and everything was so close, you were told not to use GPMGs. But then the lads in B Company got a couple of good hits on us on the aircraft. So then the rule changed. If you have a good enough shot, then you can use small arms, GPMGs, or whatever else on the aircraft if you can get it. So it was like a fluid situation. So you had to use your common sense and watch. You're there's the aircraft, but beyond that aircraft is a friendly position. So you are in danger of hitting that position. So therefore you would not fire on that aircraft. But if there was nothing in your fall of shot, then you could have a go at that aircraft if you wish to.
At one point you mentioned that and it was somewhat randomly as far as which ones were picked, but landing craft also had included Scorpion and Scimitar light vehicles. How effective were they? Did you really want one or not? You know what I mean? Like, did you feel like it was potentially even a weight hindrance at all as you were trying to get off the craft at all? I mean, what was your general opinion, or what was the troops' general opinion of these vehicles?
It's nice. They're nice to have.
Okay.
Because if that ramp had gone down and then fire started coming in, you want that in that landing craft.
You want that to get hit, not you.
Yeah. You want that suddenly flying out of that landing craft and just blowing anything up you can see. Yeah, I mean, they're handy to have. I only came across them a couple of times. I think it's more the Scots Guards and the Paras use them quite a lot on the hills.
Okay.
I only come across a couple of times. Once after we were walking back from Goose Green post the Battle of Goose Green, because we went there to pick up the prisoners, and then the numbers started creeping up and up and up and up and up and up, and then it was just there's too many. Turn around and come back. And then the last time was on the Stanley Road on the 14th. But we never really sort of come across them that much.
Because they weren't, I mean, so they couldn't really pull them out too far out, or they'd be a target, of course. And then not only that, they were probably, a glaring target to be anywhere near to, potentially, right? So in other words, they would give away your position too, but of course, protective. But so I just hadn't really heard of their direct use,
I mean, the likes of Tumbledown and stuff, when Mount Harriet and everything else was going on that night, a bit of a busy night, they were quite active then. And they lost the
that's okay.
They were very active on the actual battles. They're very useful.
And who would have been assigned to them? Who would have been assigned to being operating those vehicles?
Whoever was deemed to need them would get them.
Okay.
So obviously Julian or someone would look at the overall battle plan and go, right, the Scots College could really do with some armour there.
Right.
The rest of the lads can just fight with the Milans.
Speaking of Thompson, he seemed to be a pretty vocal proponent for the use of 40 Commando throughout.
Yeah.
Just in general, without getting too, judgmental here, what was your opinion of the leaders, and was it as immediate, like were your opinions formed very quickly on the spot, or were they developed like post conflict, and did it affect your, if you remember, and you don't have to answer any if you don't want to answer.
In respect to Julian, he was a former commanding officer of 40 Commando. Okay. So he had very strong feelings about the unit. And the same as Malcolm Hunt, RCO. I mean, he still feels sore about it today. That you can't have a commando unit just babysit in a pile of stores. It doesn't make sense. And that's why he was trying to constantly bring the unit forward. And we were told, okay, when Fire Brigade come, they'll take over your position and you'll move forward. Mm-hmm. And then, it really hurt when they went through our position. So, what's happening there?
Right.
We found out later that part of it was down to Michael Clapp.
Okay.
Because he obviously knew the Marines and everything else. He wanted a unit that he could trust to look after his ships and his anchorage.
So, as a slight devil's advocate here, right? You there was an unknown as well, right, involved.
Oh yeah.
You didn't know necessarily what forces would potentially attack from West Falklands, right? And I think you mentioned even at one point or another that Argentines had a plan potentially, right, for two regimental size, I think, units, and then even potentially, and I had not read this before your book, that they were even potentially thinking of bringing a regiment size unit from the mainland as well.
So there was a constant threat from West Falklands because they were constantly watching the forces build up there. But it was like, look, we're concentrating on east. Right. West is west if it comes off. And then when they come the end of Port Howarth and Fox Bay, they were quite sizable units and they had a lot of kit with them. But they didn't have the means to get across San Carlos Water. You did in theory.
Okay.
Sorry, Peter, go on.
No, that's okay. Did you think that Clapp also felt like did he have more confidence in the rapier systems and did he have enough, do you feel like he had maybe overconfidence in how much you were actually helping protect? You know what I mean by that?
Yeah. I don't think that came into it, and I honestly couldn't say.
Right.
But he was just concerned because he knows the way we work. We know the way he works and the Navy works, and he knew in his own mind that's one big problem he can happily just put to the side. So if anything happens from West Falklands and they somehow try and attack the ships in the harbour, in San Carlos water, it will be dealt with.
So the other argument could be, and it ended up happening, right? Unfortunately, with what unfortunately happened with Galahad and Tristram, they needed reinforcements, and they needed skilled reinforcements as well, right? So there is something to say for an elite unit being available to fill in the hole, right? So one of my questions that had come to mind was, I'm assuming that the unit was, as a whole, of course, it probably was difficult to maybe gauge this opinion on site, but I'm assuming the unit was happy to see A and C Company become involved.
Yeah, I mean, because we'd lost anti-tanks to 4-5 post May 27. A and C obviously got merged with Fire Brigade. So, yeah, they were happy. Did I say slightly jealous?
Yes, that's what I was trying to get at. That'll be for the next reunion meeting, right?
But we'd much rather, and Mr. Hunt would much rather the whole unit was going forward rather than part and parcel. Because whoever went, according to the records, we left, we landed, and that's it. Because wherever we went, we got absorbed into 4-5, we got absorbed into Fire Brigade. So we just disappeared and got erased. So we were just this group at San Carlos.
Right.
And that's the way it's seen. You look through all the various books and you'll very, very rarely read about it or just get a note of A&C or anything else. And that's still here to the lads today.
Right. Well, speaking of, I mean, you did just have a 40th year reunion, right, or meeting, right, anniversary.
Yeah.
How did that? I mean, just generally speaking, how did that? I meant to ask you how it went, and just
absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Were you able to? Were you able to present the book as well in some form, or?
No, unfortunately, there was a bit of an admin error at the publishers. And a couple of knew it was there, and one or two had bought copies, and you were still waiting for copies to arrive.
So yeah, the one thing I did want to highlight about the book is it could have been easy for you to use too many of your own opinions or your own viewpoints. I felt like you were very, very respectful of the unit as a whole, and how you presented it, and there's a huge variety of individuals that you interviewed. So, how had you originally approached the idea of the book? Had it been in the back of your head for a long while? What was the final decision point of going forward with it?
It had been in the back of my head for a long, long time, because over the many, many years, 40 years now, you can see where you read in the books, and again, as you said before, that there's just no mention of 40 in there, and you know the true story. You're thinking, this is just not right. We've been erased from history. Got to put this right. So I sort of sat down and then just started to sort of think, right, how am I going to do this? So I got all the official documents, and again, because we were absorbed into everything, you had to get 40s War Diary, Fire Brigade's War Diary, and things, and try and sort of pick out these little bits to put it right. So that was pretty much the aim of the book, was to put the unit back where it should be in the annals of history.
And had you presented it to the unit did you told them you were in the process of doing that, and anybody that wanted to come forward to be included? How did that?
I just basically let the lads know that, put a general sort of message around, say, look, I'm looking to do this. Anybody's got anything, any photos or anything, give me a shout. And then quite a few lads came in, give me all the stuff, and then word went round and a few more came in. The initial draft I sent to the CO to see if he was happy with it, and he was quite happy with it. So, and then just progressed it from there, and then sent it in.
Are many? Yeah, I hear you now. Sorry, I had there's a little bit of a network hiccup there. Are many of the officers still with us, and have they? Are they also fond of what you've done? And did the officers at all provide any input as well throughout?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to speak to the officers the other weekend, but they will be happy because it's
Right.
they're putting the
Right.
unit back where it should be.
Right.
We had a little bit of input from, not directly from two of the officers, but indirectly by the CO and another. They both pretty much came up with the same unpublished letters and
Right.
documents and things.
You mentioned throughout, and I'm sorry for this is a very particular question, but you mentioned a map with there was a 6-digit grid format, right? Does that map still exist by any chance? Does anybody still have a copy of that map? Because I'd love to see these grid coordinates that you're referring to throughout. I thought it was
the transparencies.
Yes.
Yeah, you do actually, you can actually see them in the war diary, but you'll have to have the corresponding scale map to go with them to overlay them.
Right. Is that like a 25,000 to 1 scale map? I think
probably,
you mentioned.
yes. They will vary. Only 25,000, yeah.
And then, so my question is, did everybody carry one of them? Did everybody have one of these in their kits? And like these?
No.
All right. So it's only speaking of, how were radiocomms handled throughout? Was it? I know there was a limited number of just from other documentaries and so forth. There was a limited number of SATCOM units as well. Were each of the commandos given or supplied any specific communications equipment in that regard, or was it just your normal kit?
No, it was the normal Klansman with the throat mic.
Okay.
And then you'd have a brigade net. So A, B, and C would go back to HQ.
Okay.
And then they'll just collate it and relay it all to there, where you could do
This was all like VHF, line of sight radio, right? So did you ever have any issues with communications because of the terrain?
I didn't know.
No. Okay. So
I would imagine some of the lads probably did, as you say, because the terrain was just horrendous.
Right. I would think that if you're in the valleys that you would have had some difficulties, but so you would just probably have to yomp it up to the top, whatever you could find. Right. All right. Interesting. What else? Okay. So I have an extremely important question. I've been waiting to ask you. I've been waiting so long to ask you this. Have you ever been a member of the Judean People's Front or the People's Front of Judea?
What?
Life of Brian, right?
Yeah.
I loved your life. I loved your Life of Brian quotes. Was that? And did I also, the other question is, what did the Romans do for anybody? Right. Okay. Another Life of Brian joke. Sorry. That must have been a popular movie, like right then, or in Britain.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. That is my favorite Monty Python film, by the way, of all time.
Yeah. My favorite bit's the nights where he sort of like cuts his arm off, and the other one with his legs.
Right. Sure. Of course, Grail is a great one too. But, yeah. But if I'm not mistaken, I think they sang one group of
Always look on the bright side of life.
Yes. Did they? I think they sang that as they were being kind of forced off the island. Is that? Am I remembering that right? When they were being evacuated? Yeah. Okay. All right. So, I don't think it was just your unit. That's funny. So there was a lot of brotherly jibing, I guess is the way to put that. I think most units do that, even in the thick of, adversity, right? So it seemed like humor was involved at times, right? Like I remember the one the rubber band joke. Oh, what was it? Something
Oh yeah,
about pork.
the biscuits.
Yeah, I thought that was remarkable. So it's like, so it's always, of course, in your moments of angst that you try to try to lighten the mood. But I thought that was brilliant. So
Yes, it's your typical sort of dark humour.
right.
That you'll get in any sort of military establishment, probably over your side of the pond as well, where everyone's going to wind each other up, and certain things are going to get to someone, and you're going to wind them up.
Especially if you're, I would imagine all everybody yomping across the Falklands had to do something, had to keep you had to keep tempos in some regards to keep your mind going. There was some mention. This I found interesting. You had mentioned the possibility of transporting light artillery forward, like with helos, and I don't know if you remember any of that. Like, and did you feel like 40 Commando would have been involved with that significantly, or?
No, we have 2-9 Royal Artillery, so that was in theirs. So we have 5-9 Royal Engineers and 2-9 Royal Artillery, who have gone through what we call the All Armed Commando course. So they're effectively commando trained Army engineers, Army artillery, and they work permanently with us. So 5-9 are in Plymouth in a fort, and 2-9 are on the Citadel on Plymouth Hope.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Sphinx Battery with 4-5. So that'll have been sort of the 2-9 lads being flown forward. Yeah.
And what was I going to say? So there was some mention of potentially helping the SBS and SAS on anti-submarine patrols. I'm trying to figure out what those are. Are those rubber boat? Is that rubber boat depth charging? Or how does that work?
I don't know how that was going to come about. That was actually in the War Diary. Now, we do quite often exercise with both those groups,
right?
And like now things have turned on their head, and it's the mix is quite a lot much bigger,
right?
But you do tend to sort of exercise with those now and again. So I don't know how that would have come about, because you only had, like, as you say, Geminis, or you had the rigid raiders.
When you think about it, there still was a submarine active potentially in the area. There was no known, no one had knowingly taken out San Luis, for example. So it's still operating out there, and it's a diesel sub, and it can probably operate pretty close to San Carlos. But so I would imagine that because of how many ships were operating in the area, it would have been kind of difficult to see a submarine other than getting out there and looking for it. So and there obviously wasn't that much in the way of like maritime patrol aircraft on hand either. So
no, you'd have to have some sort of portable sonar,
right?
Because how else would you see it?
Was there any other fear? I know, if I recall correctly, there had been fear of at Ascension in like underwater self-manned submarines, like they were actually like the old Italian self-propelled. Yeah, exactly. So had there been any talk or fear of other kind of like improvised attacks in San Carlos area that you remember at all?
The rumors of the aircraft and things, but there was also rumors of submarines and all sorts of stuff. There was lots of rumors flying around everywhere.
Right.
And I would imagine on the ships in San Carlos there was the same sort of rumors flying around everywhere. But were they genuine? Did you put any credence to them? There's there's more things to worry about. It's where on your list of massive things to do that day are you going to fit? Are you going to fit that? How are you going to challenge it? How are you going to find it? So we were stuck on the hill. We didn't have that problem.
Do you remember being conscious of, you know, how effective the air attacks were in San Carlos, and how, was there genuine worry amongst the troops as to what they were witnessing, really, right?
Yeah, I mean, you see them come in, and then you're hearing on the system that broadsword's got one through the side, or it's got one in the hangar, and they just lost 4 lads. You're hearing that sort of thing, and you're actually watching it happen, and there's nothing you can do, basically.
Right. Was
It's
there
when
a lot of this is probably from, retroactive analysis, of course, but there was a shift in gravity from, the air attacks kind of became more close air support. Was there a palpable shift of, did you notice more close air attacks in, more inland as the troops had started jumping on? Or did you in San Carlos note actively, or do you remember noticing a shift in air attacks being lighter or less often, or I just wondering if it was conscious?
Yeah, a bit more sort of less often. We've only had 4
Yeah.
today, we've only had 6 today, but not the fact that they're moving to sort of
Okay.
close air support to get the lads who are actually moving forward initially. So we never got to hear about that bit. We just concentrated on the San Carlos bit.
Right. So if we shift our focus now towards the San Carlos, the Port Stanley operations, how a great many of those attacks were in, of course, late night, night vision goggles, etc. How was all this coordinated? How especially calling in close air support. Just if you're aware of it, just how was everything coordinated in that final push? And
I think it was generally coordinated through Woodward.
okay.
A couple of times we saw the Harriers come in with the clusters, but you would know in your orders for, like, say, Harriet, that you were going to get NGS from Glamorgan, you were going to get sort of fire support from 2 howitzers from 2.9. You knew it was coming, you knew it was scheduled in. And then obviously you had your own anti-tank weapons, which were reused another method. So the whole thing at the beginning, because the likes of Harriet's recce's were done a day or 2 before. So you pretty much had an idea where all the gun positions were, where all the Argentine positions were. So from that, you'd work out the route that they were going to take.
Right.
So it was all worked out beforehand, given out in orders, and everyone knew what everyone else was going to do.
Was there anything in the way of kind of like more old-fashioned methods of identifying yourselves to one another? Did you have any clickers or whistles or anything to any friendly identifying equipment of any kind, other than quoting Life of Brian?
No, it was all because you knew, basically. I mean, you were looking down at the mountain and you're seeing the NGS go off, and you're thinking, how is anybody going to survive that? And because they literally.
We did get one question from the audience, by the way, from Chris Sebald. How useful was the OP at Darwin, Goose Green?
Don't know.
Okay. All right.
That's more of a para sort of thing.
But were units made aware of any? The primary task, of course, was taking the airfield and the settlement back. But were there any secondary missions in regards to some of the radar installations to the south in the Stanley area? Were there any known missions to kind of take out any anti-naval operations there, because they had also had exocets on trailers and so forth in the south, in the kind of like the southern area. I didn't know if there were any
No,
known
again,
operations.
I don't know of any.
Okay.
But that would probably have been an SF or
Okay.
an ML sort of thing.
Right.
Just quickly going back to Chris, the question.
Yeah.
The OP, I'm assuming he might be talking Mount Kent, yeah. Goose Green
Chris,
Mount Kent.
Chris, are you referring to the Mount Kent OP observation point? He'll hear it in a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to shift your answer to that, you can kind of caveat it to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing. In advance, you have the mountain leaders, the Romans mountain leaders. You had SB and SAS. They'd have been way forward. So if anything, they'd have been the ones that be taking out the mobile exocet launchers and things and just clocking where they were, and then probably calling an airstrike or calling NGS and destroy it that way. So they didn't then compromise their own position.
Mm-hmm.
They could just call it in. So that's an assumption on that one. We'll come back to Chris later.
Yeah, that's fine. So I don't know if you wanted to just kind of summarize the Stanley operations from 40 Commando's perspective. I know it was a close. I think you had described it at one point as being, the Sapper Hill could have been much worse than it thankfully ended up, right? I don't know if you want to just kind of just describe the importance and the potential actions that would have occurred if the operations hadn't stopped.
Yeah, I mean, Harriet, was it the night before Harriet? Yeah, we sort of had Harriet and we were laying up, and then obviously we got quick orders to move because rumours were that there was sort of people on Sapper Hill, everyone else was now thinning out back to Stanley. So we suddenly got a lot of helicopter support, brought everyone forward to the Stanley Road. But unfortunately, the first couple of helicopters, there was a navigation error by the pilot. And he landed pretty much on top of an Argentine position. They didn't know this until the helicopter was basically now being turned into a colander. So they were pretty much flared, landed, threw the lads out, and disappeared. And the lads initially thought they've landed on the Gurkha's position, and then suddenly realised it was an Argentine one. So it's a bit of not so much of a firefight, more of a skirmish. And they got two lads were injured, only minor. They managed to basically take that position, and then the Scimitars came up, and the rest of Charlie Company and then Alf Company, and then the Welsh Guards came up, and then marched up Stanley Road onto Sapper Hill to see the delights of Stanley down below. There is a bit more to that story, but I'll let you read that properly.
Mm-hmm.
But suffice to say, I mean, originally the original idea was for 40 Commando and 42 Commando, 45 Commando to do a heliborne assault on Berkeley Sound before we actually went for San Carlos as the idea. And then originally, again, because the orders changed so often, 40 was supposed to then take Sapper Hill and go down to the racecourse ground, the common ground, and stay there. But because things were so fluid and nobody really knew what was happening or if all the Argentines had surrendered, we were told to basically stay on Sapper Hill until things could be sorted out and the actual documents and surrender could be signed from there on. And we still got my Chris.
Yeah, he was mentioning that there was a OP station northwest of GG, so that probably would have been with the second.
Yeah, that's probably Mount Kent. There is an instance on that one where the lads in the OP, I won't say who it was, said, yeah, it's fine, it's clear. Mm-hmm. And I think as you mentioned earlier on, Peter, to bring a load of artillery forward. But transpires later that if that artillery would have gone forward, the OP would have seen them. The Argentine OP that was there would have seen them. And they wouldn't have lasted very long.
Mm-hmm.
So the ROP apparently made a little bit of a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there wasn't a really good means to bring up support infantry with it, right?
Yeah.
There just weren't enough helicopters available post Atlantic Conveyor, unfortunately. So how was so those last moments, if you will, how were the troops notified to cease fire? I mean, were the did the Argentine forces nearby pretty much just immediately surrender or stop firing, or just how was? Yeah, it's kind of a weird question, I know, but
yeah, they just disappeared.
Oh, okay.
A couple of them did try and put up a bit of a fight, and they tried to go around the lads in 9 Troop, but then they've seen this happening. They saw them being flanked, so they got rid of that. But eventually, they sort of got there, and pretty much the Argentines had disappeared.
Okay.
They'd realised at that point that, or the officer, I can't think of his name, I'd realised that at that point that it was finished. So he just pulled everyone back.
And then how long did you were kind of mentioning it was going to take some time to kind of negotiate things, like what was going through the troops' minds at that point? Did everybody feel like, okay, this is it, or
happy it was
there
over?
Any trepidation?
Yeah, happy it was over, but because you didn't really know what the situation was, it's a bit like a tinderbox, if I can put it that way.
Right.
You didn't know whether everyone was going to agree to surrender, or pockets were going to agree or not agree. So everyone was on edge for a bit until the surrenders actually happened, and then the lads over in West Falklands were told, and all the other various areas around Stanley and that were told, right, it's finished, lay down your weapons.
Was there, that's another odd question, but was there any feeling of surprise at how many enemy there were? I mean, or was there reasonable intelligence? Did the number of surrendering enemy troops match what your impression was of what you were up against? I guess is my question.
Yeah, we pretty much knew roughly what was there. I mean, the only big surprise was Goose Green. That was a massive surprise. But they pretty much knew what it was because they had very, very good intelligence by then. The lads going forward, working forward, they pretty much got a fair bit of good evidence and intelligence and fed it back.
So, I mean, how immediate was like the POW kind of roundup, I guess, for lack of a better term? How was that handled? Were the enemy units separated? Were they like separated from their own units at all? To kind of keep down potential flare ups and.
Yeah, we were left on the hill. I think it's 4, 5, and Paras think they just basically brought them in groups, dropped the weapons, dropped the kit, sent them down to the airport, and then collated them and stuff from there, and eventually fed them through the system.
And then how long was it before they were like repatriated back and in effect?
A week, I think. A couple of days to a week. It's fairly quick.
Right.
Because they just wanted.
And I thought even was Canberra used for that? I mean, there were some. Yeah.
Because they wanted them out of the way, because otherwise you'd have to feed them, water them,
right, exactly.
Okay. And they were a big problem because if one kicked off, then 2 or 3 might kick off, and it's just a large number of them. So get rid of them, and send them home.
So I had promised to kind of give you a bit of a plug for your previous book as well, Courage After the Battle. I don't even know if it will come in the cover. Yeah, okay, there it is. But so what made you write Courage After the Battle? What was your imperative? What was in the back of your mind? Had you post retiring from the service or discharging from the service? What made you kind of get into that?
Well, over here we have a thing called a military covenant. I think we stole it from yourselves and
Okay.
slight variation of it. And one of my last jobs, I used to work, and then used to 3 or 4 times they used to get together. There was Department of Works and Pensions, just the government, various housing groups, military groups, lots of other groups, and every month you'd see the same people promising the same information, the same, oh yeah, we'll do this, we'll do that. And they never did.
Mm-hmm.
And none of these had any inkling on military life. And you could see there were massive, massive holes. And when I left, I thought, right, I'm going to collate all this information and then put it all together. So you'll see the video. I'm going to have to cheat now, Peter, if I can't remember.
It's okay. It's okay. But well, okay, before we dig into that, I mean, when did you discharge? When did you retire?
1989.
Okay, all right. So were you also a part of the secondary operation or the follow-up operation there? It was I can't remember the operation. Did you go back down to Falklands during the separate operation? I can't remember the name of it.
It was just pure fluke more than anything, because we have like a 3-year cycle in the Marines.
Right.
And after we got back from the Falklands, then the whole unit was scheduled to go to Northern Ireland for 6 months anyway, in early '83. So we did that. And then the unit was on a med trip, working with Italians and Spanish and just cross-training and things. So I thought, great, I'm on that. I was taken off because I've got what we call a ship's detachment. So over here, we can have like 12 Royal Marines will go on a ship, and whenever that ship goes, they will go as part of the crew. So I got my detachment, and then it's my old boss, Andy Salmon, was actually my OC. So we ended up Ascension, South Georgia, Falklands, and tossed between South Georgia, Falklands for about 3 or 4 months. So during that time, we sort of got to go out, did patrols and stuff around Darwin, Goose Green, over on the West Falklands. In fact, over there's an island, Weddell Island, and we tended to call in at settlements to sort of stay around there somewhere. And we got to the settlement at Weddell Island, and the manager there asked us if we were at the top of the island earlier on today. So yeah, it's where we were dropped off and we've gone through. Why? He says, well, that's good, because my dad saw you. He lives up that end of the island, and he thought, oh, here we go again.
Oh, no.
So he just saw these figures just on the ridge. So he said, I will just phone him now and let him know it's you lot. So
right, one of the sorry to go back, but one of the kind of surprises was that there were families still in the San Carlos settlement throughout.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, that just
I think it was 13 civilians when we landed, and they were still there. They don't care.
Right. I mean, were they evacuated to?
No. Oh no. I mean, I think at one point we got told that the farmer will be moving his cattle.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that.
Hang on a minute. This is in the middle of a war zone, and he's moving his cattle.
So are all these like Shetland sheep? What are they? Are these like the really woolly versions of that I've always wanted to ask that. I don't know why. I have weird questions. Sorry.
Yeah, you have the upland goose, which is a big goose.
Right. Okay.
You have the big woolly sheep, and then you have the cattle. It's predominantly a sort of a sheep farm.
Right, and then the cattle. How large are those? How large are those cows?
Just your normal cows.
Okay. All right. They're not like super muscular.
No, not
for being on the muscle.
No. Yeah, they're just normal sort of British cows.
Right. So there was some mention in your book about potentially even using their tractors and their flatbeds for moving kit, if nothing else, right?
Yeah, that wasn't us.
Oh yeah, okay, all right. So that was the
That,
other elephant on the island. That was
yeah,
the Welsh guards, right?
yeah.
Which I thought you had a very polite. I thought you were very polite throughout. By the way, um,
Thank you.
yes, very good. Yes, we won't get too into that. And then of course, what A and C Company had to fight alongside them, right? So
Yeah.
that must have been interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, I should point out, I tried to be as polite as possible.
Right,
But yeah, I mean, you can hear the waterproofs miles away,
right,
the legs
right,
and
right.
stuff. And you go, oh God. I think there's one comment in there about you see all the twinkly like stars in the night from all the fires, but it wasn't sort of non-tactical. It was low cloud cover.
Mm,
When it's low cloud, how can you see them?
mm-hmm,
And if you can see them, everyone else can see them.
Everyone else can see them. Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Any cheesemakers on the Falklands? Apparently,
Excuse me.
Chris was asking if there are any cheesemakers on the Falklands. I would think so, probably, right?
Probably not then, but there probably is
Okay,
now because it has because the garrison's got massive now,
right.
um, and you've got RAF. Oh, good God, new airfield there. Can't think of the name of it. Mount Pleasant. Um, Stanley has grown up quite a lot, so I would imagine there'd be cheesemakers and stuff there if you fancy it.
And the airfield's like what a good 10,000-foot airfield now, right? It's got
It's a monster, yeah.
yeah.
Because one of the things they used us for in '84 was donkeys, because they said, "Oh, we need all this survey gear. Take it to the top of that mountain, stick it on
Wow.
your back, and just carry it up for us."
Okay.
That's nice of them.
All right.
So we learned later that was for the survey to actually position the runway and the various bits for Mount Pleasant.
Well, speaking of it, it sounded like there was a FOB or a forward air base that was created pretty quickly near Goose Green post Beachhead recovery.
Yeah, they had to create something.
Right.
Stanley Airfield was not, the runway and taxiway was not built for big aircraft.
So what was my only question from that was what was being used for refueling? What were they trucks of fuel or like aircraft? Aircraft grade fuel is of course pretty high octane. I mean, like where did that come from, and what containers were used for that? I don't excuse these logistical.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know myself. I'm assuming
Right.
that a lot of it come from Argentina or via Argentina.
Okay.
There were storeships that came in, but I can't see the likes of tankers
Okay.
and things.
Right.
But a
Okay.
lot of stuff came in from Argentina.
Okay. Well, it said, in the book, it was mentioned that like GR3s moved in pretty quickly, like for ground attack perspective. What happened here? Somehow I got into full screen mode. Sorry. Well, I think we will wrap things up here, unless there's anything else you wanted to say or get across, Pete. I just wanted to say absolutely thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's a very good book. I really liked I thought it was well balanced.
Yeah.
I really like it's a diary format, but I like that you included some details, some op orders, some advisories and so forth. It was a good mix, and I really like that you introduced or interjected your own observations, but you didn't make it about yourself. You made it about the unit. And I think I hope and I know that they're proud of you for what you've done with this, and I think you should be too. So it's a great book, and
Thank you,
I
Peter.
think it's a very good addition to the history, and I think hopefully you can write more books, and I will absolutely get them. And if anybody gets a chance, pick up Pete's Courage After the Battle as well. It's a very good book. It's a very unique book. I've not seen the equivalent in the United States, so I hope somebody follows suit and does something similar for kind of all these services and available for military post-service. So I think that's...
Sorry, Peter. That actually did go across to Washington, I think it was, when it first came out. Good. You have to forgive me the name of the company, but it's the company provides all the magazines to the various camps and sites and stuff.
Okay.
I'll have to try and hunt out the actual
clearinghouse or some publishers clearinghouse or something like that potentially.
Yeah, it was actually like a family group.
Okay.
I'll have to try and hunt it out for
you.
Well,
there's a Wounded Warrior project as well, which I've always wanted to somehow help with, but that's the closest thing I can think of. But yeah, it's an admirable book. If y'all can pick that up too, go for it. It's very unique, interesting perspective throughout for post battle and post service treatments and services. It's a very good book. So, all right, thank you very much, Pete, for your time and your insight. So,
cheers, Peter.
All right.